from the start again. Thanks, Phil. Good evening. I'm pleased to confirm that following the expert advice of NEFIT and reports from government departments, we will move to phase 3 on Monday, when almost all remaining businesses, amenities and workplaces can reopen. We've also decided to begin easing travel restrictions between Ireland and some other countries from the 9th of July, and approved a grant scheme to assist those who are self-employed and sole traders to get back to work. Details of these will be provided later. The past few months have not been easy for anyone, and this evening I want to offer once again my condolences to everyone who's lost loved ones during this emergency. In the months ahead, I hope we can have a national day of commemoration so we can mourn together as a nation and grieve for what we've lost. Our country has suffered greatly. Our mental health has been eroded. Some people became sick. Many more were sick with worry. People lost their jobs and were worried about their livelihoods and their futures. We worried about family. We worried about friends. And we worried for ourselves. This has been a tough time for us all, but we've come through it as a country, and we must now try to repair the damage that has been done across all parts of our lives and show the same solidarity in doing so. I believe if we show the same courage, the same determination, the same care for each other, we will overcome these challenges as well. I've been Taoiseach now for 3 years, and it has been the greatest honour of my life. I think I've learned more in the past 3 months than I have in a lifetime in politics. I've learned that hope is stronger than fear, that working together we can defeat any challenge, and that we are an extraordinary people when we're at our best. I pray that our country never has to go through something like this again, but if we do, we need to learn the lessons, learn from experience, and be prepared for a second wave or a completely different kind of pandemic or public emergency. It's possible that this is my last press conference as your Taoiseach, and if so, I want to end by saying thank you to the men and women who kept our country protected and guided us through this emergency. I believe our country owes a profound debt to the Chief Medical Officer, Tony Holohan, who's become one of the most trusted figures in the country and made us all feel that we were in safe hands. We thank Liz Canavan of the Department of the Taoiseach as well, who provided daily briefings and whose command of the crisis gave us confidence, and also the countless civil and public servants who worked behind the scenes to keep our country on its feet. To the men and women of NEFIT and the various committees and expert groups who advised, guided and shaped our healthcare response, thank you. We thank our doctors and nurses and healthcare staff who day after day put other people first as they fought against a disease that showed no mercy. During this crisis, I think we really defined as well what frontline work really means. We learned that not all heroes wear scrubs, that some wear supermarket uniforms, some deliver our post, some drive our trains and buses. They are our Gardaí, our journalists, our broadcasters, the men and women who found new ways to keep our spirits up during this emergency. They are the people all around us. So this evening, I'll end with no poem, no quote, no words of inspiration, because none are needed. Until now, we needed some hope to cling to, but your actions have kindled that hope and turned it into a reality. So instead, I'll end by thanking each and every one of you. Only you know the true weight of the burden you carried over the past few months. I know that sometimes you were able to share that burden, and sometimes you had to carry it alone. And I'm sorry for everything you had to go through. Your actions, your choices, your sacrifices, and your decisions changed the destiny of our country and saved us from the worst. By following the public health advice, by choosing to restrict your lives, you helped suppress the virus and you saved lives. Our country has suffered, but it has prevailed, and we emerge to face a new day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we had a very busy Cabinet today, but I'm pleased to be able to make a number of announcements. Firstly, we have decided that my department's Enterprise Support Grant will now be made available to people to assist self-employed recipients who are exiting the pandemic unemployment scheme. So many small business owners or sole traders will now be able to avail of a once-off grant of up to €1,000 to restart their business. And the grant will be payable to self-employed business owners who employ fewer than 10 people, have an annual turnover of less than €1 million, and are not eligible for the supports from the Covid-19 Business Restart Grant or any other similar business reopening grants. The officials in my department are currently developing the systems to put it into effect, and we will communicate next week to all of those self-employed or sole traders how to apply for it. We want to get Ireland back working again, and in many cases that means tackling the roadblocks or the obstacles that stop otherwise viable businesses from getting back up and running, or simply giving them a helping hand. So I think it's crucial that we approach this task in a flexible manner, and that's what this announcement will underpin today. I'm also really pleased to be able to announce that we're extending the school meals programme for summer 2020. Generally, the funding from the school meals programme ceases at the end of the school year, which we are all aware is coming up in the next number of weeks, which is the end of May, obviously, for post-primary schools. However, I want the scheme to be available over the summer period to ensure that children who do not have access to nutritious food, that they will continue to receive the food from the providers through their schools during the summer holidays. So therefore, we're making the programme available to all schools and organisations currently in the programme, so that over the summer, for approximately the next 9 weeks, until the new school year starts in September, they will be able to avail of the funding. And I think it follows in the same vein as our previous decision to allow funding of the school meals programme to be used to participating schools for the summer programme to identify pupils who are unlikely to get nutritious meals at home during the lockdown period when the schools have to shut. I think I've always felt that the social effects of the pandemic needed to be tackled just as much as the health effects and the threats. And for many children and families, the school meals programme is incredibly important, and it literally puts food on the table during the lockdown, and we wanted to make sure that we continued this during the summer.
Thank you very much. So as the Taoiseach has said, from Monday we will move forward with phase 3 of our reopening of Ireland, of Ireland's economy and of Ireland's society. And I think it's important that we note and remark that this was not inevitable. When we published a roadmap, we published one knowing that it was to be slow and steady and grounded in public health advice, and one which could be sped up if it was safe to do so. We could well have found ourselves standing behind podiums saying we have to pause, or indeed we have to go backwards. And thank God we haven't been in that position. And the reason we haven't been in that position is thanks to the incredible efforts and sacrifices of each and every person in this country. You have brought us to this point of great progress. And over the last few weeks, we've reopened our doors to visitors, we've reopened our doors to friends, our shops have welcomed back much needed and valued customers in a new and safe way. Our children have been visiting the playgrounds again and getting out and about and getting a chance to see their friends. And yet, despite all of this increased movement, and it's been a significant amount of extra movement of people, Ireland has seen the biggest drop in new cases across the entire European Union in the past 2 weeks. We've had fewer than 200 cases, new cases of COVID-19 over the last 14 days. Last week we had on average 19 cases a day. This week it's been on average 9 a day. Today the number of people hospitalised with COVID-19 stands at 31, and the number of people in ICU with COVID-19 is back in single digits, 9 for the first time since this pandemic disrupted our lives in such a real and serious way. I'm conscious that when we quote figures and statistics and talk of progress, that behind every figure is a real person, a real life, a real family, a real community, a real circle of friends. And we think and pray for everybody who is still sick in our hospitals and in our country today. And we particularly think of all those who've had to grieve throughout this process and have had to grieve in particularly unusual and painful ways, not being able to have the traditional wake, the hugs, the get-togethers, the things that we do in this country. And I want people to know that they don't grieve alone. We grieve for each and every lost life in this country. So this evening I can't thank the Irish people enough. This has been an extraordinarily challenging and painful time, but people have been phenomenal. And now we can move forward. with phase 3 of our roadmap. From Monday, we will lift travel restrictions right across this country. We can reunite with desperately missed friends and families. I have no doubt that next week is going to be a week of people meeting up with mum or dad or their son or their daughter or their grandkids, no matter where they live in this country. It's going to be a week of immense emotion, immense support and immense joy. Our restaurants can welcome in customers, sports can recommence, and thank God hairdressers and barbers can reopen. Many of the things that we may have taken for granted have become great gifts. And we know the risks, because increased movement, increased interaction, as our Chief Medical Officer always reminds us, carries with it increased risk. But we each now know our responsibilities. We know how we go about trying to live alongside this virus. We know we need to remain extremely vigilant. We know that this pandemic is far from over globally, and we know what each of us has to do, keeping our distance, washing our hands, coughing into the elbow instead of the hand, and indeed now wearing face coverings on public transport and in areas where you can't socially distance. And I know people are fed up and sick to their back teeth of hearing us repeat that mantra, but that's what's brought us to this point. Those simple public health messages, that new way of living, they're going to be the tools, they're going to be the safety net that will determine the next chapter of living alongside COVID-19 in our country. Because this virus doesn't act alone, it can only thrive if we let it. And we must absolutely recommit to not allowing that happen. So today we move forward with the information and the power we need, and our country's tomorrow is in our hands. So let's continue to stay safe, to protect each other, and to enjoy a return to normality whilst accepting it must be a new normal. Thank you.
First of all, for the Taoiseach, you mentioned that there will be reopening of air bridges from July the 9th. Is there any guidance as to what countries might air bridges be open to, or how exactly will they be arrived at? Was there any decision made today, for example, as to what countries will be considered appropriate for that? And Minister Harris, on face masks, a lot of people would like if face masks were simply provided when you were entering public transport. So any consideration to that? And also, how will they be policed, and will there be any penalty for breaking that? Might there be fines, for example, if people board public transport but then take off the mask?
Just on international air and sea travel, 3 things are going to happen. There'll be a green list of countries produced by the 9th of July. And if you're flying or going by boat between countries that are on the green list in Ireland, the 14-day quarantine will not apply. Also, we'll be stepping up checks and controls in the airports. The passenger locator form, for example, will go online. It's a much better way of making sure we get the accurate data from people, that they fill it in as they check in online. A couple of other changes in the airports as well. And then thirdly, there will be an expanded list of exceptions. You know, there are essential employees that we need to come into the country, whether it's somebody coming in to fix the MRI machine or something like that. We need them. There isn't a list of countries yet. That will be coordinated on an EU level. There's no single criteria that will be used, but it'll be a mix of epidemiological criteria that will be used to create that list of countries. But I do need to caution people that list of countries will be reviewed and will change and may change every 2 weeks. So we may see it getting longer, but if a country ends up having a second wave or there are particular spikes, then they may be taken off that list as well.
Just in relation to the issue of the face coverings, I should point out, I suppose government's only decided in the last hour or so to take this step. So on the recommendation of the Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport, we now intend to move forward under the emergency health regulations, or the emergency health law that allows us set regulations to make the wearing of face coverings mandatory on public transport. There will obviously, by the virtue of it being a law and mandatory, there will be a sanction, but I'm not yet in a position to detail how some of those issues around enforcement or sanction will work. My department will be taking instruction from the Department of Transport in terms of how they see this working, and we'll be engaging with them with the hope that we would be in a position to regulate over the kind of next week to 10 days is sort of the time frame that we're looking at. I do hope the message has gone out, and indeed one of our colleagues relayed to us at Cabinet today, even being on public transport, remarking that a lot more people seem to be even wearing them today. So often when you make it clear, pardon the pun, the direction of travel in relation to this, it often alters behaviour in and of itself. Government hasn't given consideration to, as of yet, to providing face coverings. And I would make the point that I consistently make: you shouldn't wait for a law change or a government to give you something in this regard. You just need to get yourself a face covering. We're not talking about medical face masks. You can make them at home. There's very good and simple videos online, including the Department of Health's website, as to how to make them, and just get into the habit then of, along with your keys and your mobile and your wallet, carrying your face covering in a bag in your pocket or your suit jacket or your handbag or whatever suits you. So I do think I wouldn't like people to think that they need to get a medical grade face mask like perhaps a nurse or a doctor needs. We're talking about something that can cover your nose and your mouth, and there's plenty of details available online in that regard.
Just for a bit more clarity on Gavin's question, there isn't going to be a list until the 9th, so anyone booking their holidays possibly shouldn't do so until then. Is that correct?
Yeah, the advice at the moment is that people should not engage in any non-essential travel off the island, and that stands. But we are signalling that come the 9th of July, we will have a list of countries, a green list of countries, which you can travel to. If you travel between Ireland and those countries, the 14-day quarantine period will no longer apply.
Dr. Hoolan, in your statement this evening, you said that there is an element of risk to this. Are you fully happy that this is a measure that is okay to go ahead and it's an acceptable risk to take? And then separately, Taoiseach, tomorrow obviously a big day in terms of votes. Do you think we will have a new government this weekend?
So there's an element of risk in every single action that we take as we begin to move society back towards normal, and the functioning of society and the economy involves us getting out and about more in ways that we weren't obviously over the last number of months. That will involve us having more contact, and the opportunity for transmission of the virus may increase. And that's why we continue to emphasise the importance of all of the personal behaviours that we're emphasising around basic hand washing and respiratory etiquette, the importance of knowing symptoms and responding to all of those kinds of things. So there's no measure that's being recommended and that's being commenced that doesn't carry with it some level of risk. In the context of this particular one, the intention is that we will have, and there is work happening at a European level, verifiable information that will allow us to know which countries are at or close to the kinds of threshold of incidence that would apply in this country. And the sharing and movement of people between countries that have verifiable information as to the nature of incidence within those countries, that doesn't represent an increased risk of transmission. There are many countries who are not in a position that we've been in, and the Minister has referenced the significant improvement that we've seen even in the last 2 weeks, and in the 2 weeks prior to that, the reduction that we've seen in the incidence of the disease in this country hasn't been matched by many other countries across Europe. In fact, when we look at the 14-day incidence across Europe, there are about 11 countries now that actually over the last 14 days it has disimproved relative to where it was. So it's a very dynamic situation. So countries that might be on a list, which in principle is about verifiable, showing that they are at or close to the kind of level of incidence that we would have, is not something that you could identify 2 or 3 weeks hence. It will be a dynamic situation, as the Taoiseach has indicated.
My prediction is that the three parties tomorrow will vote to go into coalition with each other, that the yes vote will be larger than people expect in all three parties, and that we will have a new government on Saturday.
Okay, next question, Jennifer Gray.
For the Minister for Health, just in relation to today's meeting, was there a decision made about the future of the contract with the private hospitals, and was there a decision made in relation to the use of the City West facility? And for the Taoiseach, there's been a lot of talk of a plan B if this deal doesn't pass tomorrow, maybe a temporary Taoiseach to get the offences into the state afternoon. Is there an arrangement in place, and if so, who is that Taoiseach?
So
there's no arrangement in place.
In relation to the private hospitals, there wasn't a decision taken today, nor was I expecting there to be one. There is engagement ongoing between the HSE, supported by my department, and the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform with private hospitals. There's 3 elements to what we'd like to see from any agreement, the most important being the opportunity to access that capacity should we see a second surge or a very difficult situation with COVID-19. I'm very grateful to the private hospitals for the way they're engaging. So government, I suppose, made its decision in relation to stepping back from the existing agreement and mandating the HSE to negotiate a new one. So that's where that now lies. In relation to City West, I did inform the government today, as part of an overall update on COVID, that it is the HSE's intention to not extend the contract for City West. From my memory, that existing contract runs till around October. So they will be they'll be having discussions as to what they may wish to use that facility for, from a health service point of view or another public service point of view between now and then, or indeed other options that may exist. But the HSE has taken a decision at a board level not to seek to extend that contract beyond the existing one.
Can I just ask, in relation to the airports, you said that extra precautions might be put in place. What would they be? Would they be like testing on one side of the travelling to the next? And also you mentioned some sort of Memorial Day or an honorary day to remember all of this. Would you see that as some sort of bank holiday, or what way would you like to see that play out?
Yeah, I don't have any firm plans on that yet, but I think it would be appropriate to have a day to remember all of those who lost their lives in this pandemic, and also to honour all of those who worked through this pandemic. But I'm conscious it's not over yet, so I think it's an idea that we will give consideration to, but maybe a little bit premature at this stage. Yeah, that's something that has to be worked out in a bit more detail between now and the 9th of July. We need to engage more with the airports and ports, and also the airlines and the ferry companies. But the kind of things we'd be talking about would be hand sanitisation, masks, moving the passenger locator form onto a digital footing, so that people don't get their boarding pass until they filled in all the fields accurately. Potentially things like temperature checking as well. Testing isn't ruled out, but it's far from straightforward. It takes time. People can test negative in the early days of having the virus. It's not, and it's quite expensive too, so it may not be the solution that people think it is. If we had a rapid test that was accurate, that would be a different thing. We don't have that yet, so that's unlikely to form part of the solution, but that's not to say it mightn't later on. But that will depend on the data between now and then. I think everyone knows at the moment that the incidence is very high in Britain at the moment. That may change. It does seem to be going in the right direction.
Will there be some flexibility shown to places of worship beyond the number limits that can turn up there? And also, while this feels like a milestone, is that solely because of political events this evening and the way they look to be unfolding, rather than Covid-19, which will be an ongoing issue throughout this year?
No, the timing is based on the behaviour of the virus, and for I think well over a week now we've had new cases in the single digits or less than 20. So that's the reason why we've been able to accelerate the roadmap. But I'm also cautious about this too. I am seeing what's happened in Portugal, what's particularly around Lisbon, what's happened in Westphalia in Germany, what's happened in Israel. We need to be honest with people, and also wise to the fact that further spikes or further outbreaks are not only possible, they're also likely. But I don't think it'd be right to keep the country in total shutdown for months and months, waiting for that to happen. What's much better to do is to reopen the country, but now that we've robust testing and tracing in place, to make sure we pick up any spike, any new outbreak quickly, and then apply local measures as they have in Germany and South Korea, for example, to get that under control, and that's the plan. So yes, we are reopening the country ahead of schedule. That's a really good thing. Businesses are going to open, people are going to get back to work, but we're not complacent at all about the fact that we're going to be playing cat and mouse with this virus for quite some time. Yeah, the Cabinet agreed today that we would make an exception for places of worship. At the moment, we're only allowing 50 people maximum to meet indoors. That will go to 100 on the 20th of July. However, a specific protocol is going to be worked out with the churches and religious bodies to allow more people to attend religious ceremonies. That will be very much policed by them. It'll really acknowledge the fact that there are some very large churches that could accommodate more than 50 people with social distancing and with the appropriate precautions, but the detail of that still has to be worked out. So in the same way as we worked out some specific protocols for public transport, for schools, for the hospitality sector, that will be done as well for religious ceremonies.
On the issue of face masks, they may be made mandatory on public transport. What about supermarkets? Why not supermarkets and shops as well? On the Taoiseach, you said you have no plan B for if the government deal isn't passed tomorrow, but what is your intention in terms of getting the Offences Against the State Act over the line before the end of the month? And finally, I suppose you have two colleagues there, Mr Harris and Jean Doherty as well. Can Mr Harris expect a place in Cabinet, and can Minister Doherty expect a Shannon seat in the coming days?
I can't really speak for other people's expectations, but I don't think anyone in this game of politics has expectations. But obviously, decisions will be made in the next couple of days. The answer in relation to a plan B really is the same as I gave during the week. If it is the case that one of the three parties, or more than one of the three parties, reject the programme for government, I'll reflect on that over the weekend and arrange to meet the party leaders if they're willing to meet me to see what's possible and what's not.
On the issue of supermarkets and face coverings, I mean, the rationale behind bringing them in for public transport was a recognition of the fact that we were going to need to increase capacity on public transport, and once you increase the capacity on public transport, it would become nearly impossible to keep 2 metres of social distancing, and therefore as a recognition of an additional hygiene measure, an additional public health measure that would be needed instead of that, the issue of face coverings came to the fore. There is very clear public health advice in relation to supermarkets, shops and anywhere you can't socially distance in relation to you should wear a face covering in those situations. So we're responding, I suppose, to proposals being brought forward by a line department in this area, so it remains under review for any other setting.
Do you expect to be in Cabinet then next week, and Mr Doherty, would you fancy a Shannon seat?
It would just be discourteous to answer that question.
And a very cruel question to ask, I must say.
Taoiseach, when you were in Washington at the Bear Building, I suppose the country changed, our world changed. It's been a few months since then. If there was anything you could have done differently during the pandemic, what might that be? And if I could just ask you in relation to meeting with the other leaders earlier, you're expecting a deal to pass. Will there be some overall departments and responsibilities under the new government? Thank you.
Sorry, the second part?
Just in terms of the departments, the overall departments.
There will be some reconfiguring of the government departments, but that's not agreed yet. But that'll be done to recognise that it is going to be a three-party coalition, which is going to be a bit different, and also will have to reflect the revised priorities of the new government. Thinking back to that moment in March, across the road from the White House, making the speech in the early hours that I did to the nation. Looking back then, the truth is we knew very little about this virus. We know a lot more about it now. And also because we haven't faced a pandemic like this in maybe 2 or 3 generations, there was really no roadmap, no manual that we could follow, nobody who'd lived experience that we could talk to. So on all occasions, any decision that was made with the information that was available and based on the best advice, with the overriding intention of saving as many lives as possible and protecting as many lives as possible. And if you remember back then, we had a real concern that maybe 20% or 25% of the population could have got this virus. That's 1.1 to 1.5 million people. If 3% of those had died, we would have faced deaths of somewhere between 30 and 45,000. So that's the counterfactual position that we managed to avoid. Are there things that we could have done differently or could have done better? That's impossible to answer now for certain. I do think when this is all over, we're going to need to have some sort of assessment or inquiry as to what we did, what was done right, what was done wrong, what could be done better, what could be done differently. A grown-up type inquiry, not one that's designed to, go after people, but one that's designed for us to learn as a society and as a health system and as a government. But the kind of things I mentioned before, certainly if we were in a position to roll back the clock, having had stockpiles of PPE would have been a good thing. No country did, by the way, and we were much better and much quicker at getting PPE than other countries were. But that's something I think we'll certainly have in storage for the future. As it turned out, we have well over 1,000 ventilators that we never needed to use because we saw what was happening in Italy and Spain and other places, and we're concerned about our ICUs being overwhelmed. That never happened, so we've a surplus now of ventilators. I think the second thing, obviously would have been to do testing in the nursing homes sooner, but that wasn't possible. The capacity did not exist to do it. As it turns out, we were the first country in the world to test all nursing home residents and all nursing home staff. Most still haven't yet. But had it been possible, we would have done that sooner. And perhaps that would have helped to save more lives in the nursing homes. But what we did was the right thing, which was to prioritise those who had symptoms, both in the community and in nursing homes. But had it been possible to test more people more quickly, I think we definitely would have done that.
One caveat, you know what role you might have in the next couple of weeks. You told us last week or two you were still thinking about it. Any decision?
I do, but it's a jigsaw, so it all has to come together, and it hasn't quite come together yet. So.
Taoiseach, some of the country's most respected health professionals have come out against the idea of reopening the skies in the past 48 hours. It said it's inevitable that the number of cases will rise. So do you accept the inevitability of a rise in cases and perhaps death if we reopen the skies, and is that an acceptable trade-off?
I wouldn't really frame it in that way. If we open air travel and air bridges between countries that have a similar incidence of the virus as we do, then the risk of that being imported into the country is no higher than it being moved from one county to the other, or from one city to the other, or one part of the country to the other. So, that's the concept behind air bridges, is that you only open up air travel between countries where the virus is at a similar level of incidence. But you can't just look at incidence, you have to take a few factors into account, because if a country isn't testing very much, their incidence is going to look lower than it really is, so we'll have to take a few things into account. I suppose beyond that, we are seeing what is happening in other countries, even countries that have had much stricter travel restrictions than we have. China, for example, New Zealand. There's not a country in the world that has successfully eliminated this virus. That's the truth of it. What we're going to have to do is suppress it as much as possible, and get used to a new normal, get used to living with this virus, and making sure that if there are new outbreaks, that we pick them up quickly and suppress them quickly.
So you don't accept that it's inevitable that we'll see a rise in cases and possibly deaths by reopening the skies?
I think, I don't know that for certain. I think we will see additional outbreaks. I think we will see new spikes. Whether they are all or mostly related to air travel, that's probably unlikely. You'll know in New Zealand it was, but they were effectively letting their citizens come home. Are we really saying that we will never allow our citizens to come home? That my sister who lives in London would never be allowed to come home? I don't think that's practical. And then in other places, for example, like Germany, it turned out to be a meat plant, and people in very congregated settings. Unclear why in Lisbon. So will there be more spikes? Will there be new outbreaks? Yes. Will the major cause of that be a return to international travel? I think probably not, but we have to bear in mind that it is a possibility.
Okay, how practical would it be to exclude the UK from any air bridge? Obviously, the virus has been much more severe there. Given we share a border with them, would it be practical to not allow people from the UK to come here? And how stable do you think this next government can be, given the deep divisions we've seen in the Green Party?
Yeah, I suppose the first question, just to say once again that Northern Ireland and Ireland have an open border. We always will, if I have anything to do with it. And yes, that does create a risk of people coming from Britain through Northern Ireland and vice versa. But if the alternative is closing the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, that's not one that I'm willing to countenance. So everything we do has a certain risk, and things we didn't do have a certain risk as well, and that's just the truth of it. And I think people understand that very well.
Does that mean that it's highly likely that the UK will be excluded from any air?
Britain. Northern Ireland will not be excluded. We will continue to have an open border with Northern Ireland. When it comes to Great Britain, that's going to depend on the numbers. But at the moment, the incidence is very high in Britain. So if it was today, we would not be removing the 14-day requirement for travel from Britain. And in fact, we're not removing it today, but we'll see where we stand on the 9th of July.
And just on the stability of
Yeah, you know, it's impossible to tell. This government made up of Fine Gael and independents lasted more than 4 years. I don't think there was a single person in this room, and I certainly wasn't one of them, who thought it would last that long and that we'd get as much done as we did. This time 4 years ago, if you'd used the words Brexit and COVID, it's quite possible nobody would know what they meant. So that just shows you how unpredictable politics is and how it is governed by events. And it's been an enormous privilege, an enormous honour to lead the country through Brexit, lead the country through this pandemic, to be part of bringing about some major social changes in this country that maybe even 4 years ago people thought were impossible. So if this happens, my party, Fine Gael, will enter this new government, enter a third government, a third chapter in government, and we will do the best we can with the resources we have, the people we have, and deal with events as they come.